Welcome to topic 6, planning, buying and peso, which is one of the bigger models we'll talk about in advertising news right now. Peso stands for paid, earned, shared and owned as different media planning. So let's get into it. COVID and planning. So here we are in the midst of one of the biggest disruptions of the last 100 years. And if anything, what it does reveal is the need to do more planning, not less. So just because we're going through a disruption does not mean you should not or cannot do planning. You need to. In fact, research shows that the companies which do best out of times like these are the ones who spend the most on marketing and marketing activities right about now. And if we're seeing anything come out of this, is also that the smarter organizations which had their scenario planning in place have done quite well, whereas those which haven't had a scenario plan for worst case scenario are not doing all that well at all. So we're learning and seeing some good lessons here when it comes to planning and organizing your marketing communications efforts in a time of crisis. So don't forget though that planning is essential for anything we do in marketing. You just can't make it up as you go along. You can do it very quickly, but you still need to have a plan or an outline of what you may want to do, because in advertising and promotion, the spend is usually the highest of all in marketing. So it's something you do need to plan for going forward. Also, don't forget that we are marketers. So we fit into the other elements of the marketing mix, but also the other methods used in marketing, the other paradigms we've already covered and discussed, like branding and relationship marketing. So promotions fits into that. It's not everything. Yes, it's important to plan for advertising promotion, but it's still, at the end of the day, just one method of achieving overall marketing objectives. Putting or relying upon promotion and advertising to do all the heavy work of all the other elements of marketing is definitely putting all your eggs in one basket. And we just had Easter, so no need to do any of that, because you'll find that you lose all those eggs pretty quickly, especially with little kids. But that said, make sure that you understand that promotion is just one aspect of marketing. A lot of people put too much emphasis on it, which is what Philip Kotler calls the 1P marketers, where they're good at only one aspect of marketing, usually promotion, but not good at the others because they forget where they are or what role promotion plays in the whole delivery of a marketing program. Okay, it is important to know your market. I've talked about this the last few topics, and I'll keep on talking about it because I'm a marketer. So it is very important to know what your market is doing, what they're active on, where they are, where they're to be found. So that's all to do and connected back to research. So this picture here from Hootsuite is 2020 figures, so we are up to date. You can see the average time they're spent using mobile devices, and this is across all markets and segments, is 3 hours and 40 minutes. And then you can see how people then spend their time on different activities. Now, it could even be the same activity done at the same time. So if you're playing a computer game or Xbox or PlayStation, you might actually have your phone next to you and then spend time on both. But you can see the overall time, though, is around 3 hours and 40 minutes. In other words, that's what you need to be thinking of here when you plan your advertising promotions campaign, is where and how long people spend their time on devices, but doesn't mean media in general, just means a device. But then you might want to break it down to what's a device they spend their time on. Is it a phone? Is it a tablet? And then what they do on that, exactly on that device as well. So this is all part of planning because it's called context. It's understanding the situation the consumer is in. It's understanding the situation your advertising promotions will operate in as well. So it's putting some thought into it. It's being a critical thinker on these topics to understand how these things may work in practice. Okay, let's get to design. Design is thinking about how you might design your plan and your marketing communications program. So, how to design an integrated marketing communications campaign. As marketers, you have to remember that planning um, is a step-by-step process to make it all happen. A lot of things we do in marketing have a step-by-step process to them to make sure they can all work okay. It's also seen as a bit of a fail-safe or a roadmap to make sure you don't veer off the path and have something wrong go on and happen. So make sure you follow these sort of designs and these steps in the design process, and they pretty much track what you're going to do with the campaign overall. So in a way, today sort of touches on some of the key parts of your campaign document you're preparing at the end of the semester. So today is a good one to listen to get a bit of a head start on where you're going. So you can see the steps involved. There's 8 there. Some people have different amount of steps, but we'll cover most of those steps right now. But you can see how you start off is always get to know your market. So we've covered that already. The research analysis, identify your target market. Of course, that's very important. And then we'll cover the next steps now about setting budget allocations and objectives. And we might cover these topics as well in the weeks ahead. So if it feels a bit repetitive at times, that's okay, because it's good to get these things right and to understand how they apply in an advertising promotions context. And don't forget what IMC means, integrated marketing communications, which means you integrate 6 elements with each other, or it can be 1 of 6, 2 of 6, 3 of 6. So make sure you understand that you can integrate these elements with each other. That includes sponsorship, by the way, which should be on that list there, but isn't, but it comes under, for some people, publicity and public relations. So make sure you cover yourself with sponsorship and understand where sponsorship fits into things. So integrate marketing communications also means that your spend should be across all 6 elements. You will need to discuss why you're using some elements over others and why it is you may not use any elements at all. So just a simple paragraph explanation of why you're not doing one element might be sufficient, but make sure you do cover and explain all 6 elements, whether you're using them or not. Okay, on to budgeting. Okay, budgeting. Budgeting is the action which expresses your priorities. It definitely needs to be reflective of how you be achieving your overall strategy. On your campaign, you should spend around 200, 300 words explaining your overall budget spend. Just in case I can't either work it out from the charts or something might be a little bit odd, maybe you've got a really high spend on one category. So making sure you explain it, even though it might, again, feel as though you're duplicating an earlier part of your plan, is fine, because you need to make sure that I understand what you're trying to do with your spend overall. In practice, budgets are definitely closely guarded secrets because they do reveal strategy. So asking a company or organisation how much they spend on something will usually lead to no answer or a very limited answer at best, because it does reveal too much about strategy. Here's an example of how you should do your budget allocation in your campaign document, because you're working on a 100% budget allocation, not on money, but on 100% spend. And you can see here the spend is broken into different types of advertising which has been happening. Now, you don't have to do it like that. You can do it like you can use the 6 elements of the promotional mix, and then explain what the spend is in more detail further on. Or you can do it on each element like here, where you break it into those very small variables and percentages, which can look a little bit messy, so it depends on what you're doing. You can run it past me if you want, just to see how the chart looks, but do understand too, with my time pressures right now, I can only spend limited time on looking at certain drafts. But it is something you can do, is not the entire document, that's for sure, but just on your chart like this, on your spend, to make sure it looks clean. So Make sure though you do that is a pie chart like this, or you can use bar charts. Some people use bar charts. I personally prefer pie chart, just makes it look easier to look at and examine. So ones like this are quite good, 3D, things like that. Spend some time on it because it does make a difference at the end of the day. But this is how you do it in practice as well. Just on your budget allocation on per method or element of the promotions mix, make sure you're realistic on your spend. So you can see opposite there, that image reveals on how people might be spending money on digital marketing, on different elements of digital marketing in the year ahead. And you can see there where the source is from, and the website provided this chart here. But also remember too, this is the new COVID era. So you've got to be realistic with your spending, because spending will be very much not necessarily capped, but more restrictive than years gone by because of how many companies are taking a hit to their bottom lines right now. So every cent you'll be held accountable for. On your campaign document doing for me, you don't have millions to spend. At best, perhaps tens of thousands if you're lucky right now, particularly as a startup, not just even as a startup, but particularly as a startup. A good guide for money, and you don't have to provide money spend, is 6 to 7% of revenue is usually spent on advertising and IMC of a company's turnover, that is. So it gives you just a ballpark figure. That's not on all marketing, that's just on advertising and IMC, because that's where the biggest expense is for most companies. So here's some charts to Deloitte. If you click on the title there, it's a nice hyperlink and you can go off to it. If you look at these marketing budgets by industry, marketing accounts for what percentage of your overall budget. You can see here where people might spend a lot more money out of that variable I just talked about before. So again, this is to help you out to understand, to be realistic with a budget, that you don't have lots of money to spend, because that'll affect the company's viability. So you can see how it varies all the way from energy at 4% to fast moving consumer goods, FMCG, or they call it here consumer packaged goods, at 24%, because they usually have to run quite intensive advertising promotional campaigns because of the competition in those sectors. And you can see it falls away quite dramatically. So fast food should be up there somewhere. As an example, fast food is around 15-20% of revenue. So people like McDonald's and Subway will spend a lot of money on promotion, even right now, because they're doing very well right now. So Domino's and places like that will spend 15-20% of revenue on their budget. Okay, also thanks to Deloitte, we have here the type of expenses per industry. So this is where people are likely to spend money on different areas of marketing. And you can see here that it's not uniform at all. And you can see it ranges from B2B product, B2B services, then B2C products, and B2C service. Now, B2B means business to business, and B2C means business to consumer. These figures are from 2017, so considering that year and also where we are right now, they're guides only. I would not say that they're something you should follow 100%, but they are providing a bit of context to your own spend. And the other thing to note from this is not every expense is on an advertising promotion. So again, it's just reinforcing that point to keep a reasonable level of spend with your planning with your own campaign document. Now, I talked about this in last week's topic, or the previous topic. Depends on how you listen to these things. This is called Peso, this model here. This is one of the newer models of media and how to do media out there. So it's paid, earned, shared, and owned, Peso. So it's a little bit easier to remember, you might say, as well, than the promotional mix, which most people struggle to remember all the 6 different elements. And you can see here how it works and how it operates. So it really touches on and includes social media, and digital media and things like that, which a lot of the older models don't because they're written before those things happened. So here you can see the different elements of their mix and how they apply the different things. So this is really good to look at in terms of media scheduling and how you may want to do your plan in a more modern context. So you can have a section on peso in your campaign, which would be under the 6 elements. So you might make it the 7th element, so to speak. But some people then break peso into the respective elements. So they do media, but then they look at how media might be done respective to each of the elements. So do get to learn peso. Peso is a really good model. It's something I'd see as being important to learn overall from the course itself. So you've got the slides there as well to look at. Make sure you go through the slides and have a look and look at this slide in particular. Okay, so peso needs to be broken down to whatever category it fits into for your plan, which will be digital, PR, and direct primarily, unless, of course, as I said, you want to do it as a separate element by itself. But expect crossover. That's one of the things about campaign documents, is that it always crossover because of the nature of advertising. You don't need to budget for free, obviously, so you might do a lot of free via social media, but you do need to explain peso in your strategy section and how you might be using free as part of an overall strategy. These sort of models became very popular nowadays in the digital promotions and comms area. So as stated in weeks prior, always keep ahead of these sort of models emerging and coming out all the time. A lot of textbooks, for example, don't touch on peso because they're written even 3, 4, 5 years ago, and they don't take peso into consideration at all because it's only a very relatively new area of knowledge and theory emerging at the moment. And people have a wait and see approach on how these things work anyway. So wanting to make sure it works in practice before first or then talking about it afterwards. Okay, away from peso now onto objectives. So peso is part of budgeting. I included it there because free always comes up in conversations with people. Where do you put that in a budget? So obviously you don't need to, but it's more part of the strategy. Onto objectives now though, and how you might formulate and design objectives. So objectives need to be SMART, which is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. For how you write them in any document, for me personally, it's always a one-line objective. So one line will be spent on the objective and then one paragraph to explain that objective. An example, well, here it is, and that includes formatting. To achieve 10% brand awareness with target market X within 12 months. And I take it you're talking on about one product. Some people will narrow it down even more specifically and say to achieve 10% brand awareness of product A with target market X within 12 months. So you've been very specific and very narrow. Then a single 8-line max paragraph to explain. You can use 2 if you really want to, but be careful on how wordy they get. So you might want to use, for example, 2 5-line paragraphs or 2 6-line paragraphs, or however it looks good, but you need to keep the readability factor here because objectives are critical for obvious reasons in how I evaluate your overall campaign, because you're then providing me with the metrics I need to see and measure you against itself. So having them too broad is not a good idea because it means then you're trying to hit too wide of a target with advertising and communications. That is a very, very hard feat to pull off. It's better to be narrow and specific and try and hit a smaller target. Okay, on to strategy and tactics. So strategy itself. Put 100 marketers in a room and you'll get 90 different answers on how to do something. There will be the 10 though who'll just Google it and produce the same answer. In other words, everyone's strategy should be unique as there are no playbooks on how to do something in marketing. Just your knowledge, belief, and the market itself. So in other words, I should see different strategies overall. You may come at the same thing in different ways, but your strategy should be different because you're all doing individually unique documents. If I see similarities, then alarm bells start ringing straight away. But also it means in a practical sense that you will be in a lot of trouble because it means that people will be able to predict your strategy very quickly, i.e., your competitors, and your plan won't last for too long. So you can see here from the image, these are different factors which affect promotion strategy and something you need to keep in mind about how you may want to balance out your strategy on different aspects of what you may do. And it's a nice little table, that one, because it does really say that you need to be thinking of the strategy as being your very own. You can talk about your strategy with other people, you can discuss it with other people, but just be careful on having the same strategy as other people. Strategy is everywhere. You'll see people having different ideas and how to approach things. It can be difficult for some people to try and work that out. And here we've got a slide on digital advertising strategy put up by our marketing academy. So they've got their own perspectives here, and you can see the budget in terms of money is very low. What I talked about before about how restricted budgets are. You can see performance indicators, or ways you might want to make sure you're hitting your targets. So the metrics or measurability of something is very important always in marketing and advertising. And you can see here what they've done through that customer decision journey, or the decision-making process we talked about in consumer behavior, and then how they've given themselves objectives at each of those steps, and then how they might try and do that in a digital advertising sense. I'm not saying whether I agree with this or not, but the one thing to note, this is their strategy. This is unique to them. So you can do something similar to this if you want to. It's a nice overall table. It will look fantastic if you're chasing the HD. I'd love to see it. But it does let you know that strategy is definitely everywhere, and that people can design these things quite quickly and easily if they have that knowledge, that background, and that understanding of their target market and the market overall. So strategy can be broken into two areas too. I talk about this in that campaign document online. Is comms and creative strategy. Now, comms is the big picture. Communications is what methods or elements will you use and why. So you need to link that back to your target market, the market, budget, and objectives. So, in other words, this is the bird's eye view of what you'll be doing with your strategy overall, what different elements you'll try and use to pull something off. The creative strategy is here more thinking about what creative elements you might use to help achieve the comm strategy. So in other words, the creative sits underneath the comms strategy overall, because the comms is what dictates creative. Because creative then means you have an ability to understand if you need to be creative with outdoor and how you might do that, but also the consistency you need to be with the rest of the communications effort and the brand itself overall. So just a bit more explanation on that creative strategy I'm talking of here. Creative is what helps get someone through your advertising model of choice, such as AIDA. It is helped, of course, by content, but creative is where you look at it and go, wow, that's a really cool idea. That's a great ad to watch. And that way gets people from awareness to interest to desire to action, you might say, very, very quickly. So creative is also what gets reach and frequency, because that way it can spread through the market quite easily. So to use 2020 language, viral and sharing nowadays, and think about this in your own personal context about what content have you shared, and usually it's because of the creative angle of that content. It's something about it which is unique and makes it an experience which then you want to share with your friends and your social network. But also understand creative can never ever hurt the brand. That will be counter to what you're doing with an overall commerce campaign. And always keep this in mind, any publicity is not necessarily good publicity in an advertising and communication sense, particularly in branding as well, is that is a silly way to look at publicity, is that you got publicity, so therefore it's fantastic for the brand. No, not at all, because it might mean then that things change, that consumers see your brand far differently or more negatively than what they had in the past. Bit more on creative strategy here. Creative does consider platform method because it needs to be consistent. The example opposite is a brilliant example of creative strategy. It really is. That's a great bit of work there, because it came out after the federal election campaign here in Australia in 2019. And it really touches on that point. It was a good outlet. It was right before an IKEA store. The image doesn't show it there, but it was. So it's good placement as well, and a good reminder to people, gets them laughing, gets them seeing the brand in a more positive light, bit of humour. But if you use that right now, it looks stupid. It would not work for the same reason I talked about. There's not been no election. We've all forgotten about Clive Palmer, if you can remember him at all. People might have forgotten the fact that Clive Palmer used yellow extensively in his branding, and that's why IKEA uses a lot of yellow there for as well on that creative angle. But here, this looks a little bit silly. People would have to remember politics and how much Clive Palmer spent in his election campaign for that to have an impact, and it just wouldn't. So you might see different ads coming out soon about the coronavirus. Okay, on to implementation. To get implementation, you need to have a schedule. You want to love graphs and tables if you want to major in marketing or work in marketing as a discipline, because we love graphs and tables. Every campaign report should have one of these, preferably in color because you're not printing them out. So color looks fantastic, and digital, of course, that's easy to do. But what a schedule is, it details the schedule of when things will run in a very simple format on different types of media. So media, all platforms, so internet, digital, offline media types like magazines or radio, things like that, or television, for example, as well. So what we call heritage media. These are all things you need to keep track of through your schedules. That way I get to understand how things run. It's got a week period at the very top there. They've numbered it off from 1 to 25. I'd prefer to see like a monthly rundown or 52-week one if you can do it. If you can do that, awesome. It'll look fantastic. If not, no worries. Just do it month by month if you can. But it just gives me an indication of what your strategy is when it comes to scheduling. So it's an important thing to see in a campaign document, and it does reveal a lot about how you might try and run something. Part of scheduling is media buying. I'm not really into it in this aspect of the course. It's big for a lot of people out there in advertising, but we just don't have the time in a course of this nature to cover media buying in any great detail. So just keep in mind that nowadays everything is moving into bots and automation. So for example, those pop-up ads you have on news websites like news.com.au, they're all automated to your cookies on your computer, which indicate what you may have looked at in the past, what you might look at in the future. So they have a rough idea of what ad is suitable for you. So it's changed from the good old days of when I was working in industry. I once placed $1 million per month of advertising expenditure working for a large brand, and it was all up to me based on my knowledge and my ability to understand where ads should be placed and how they should be placed and what media organization was going to fit best with the brand and the campaign overall. But here it should be important that you do explain in your strategy your choice of media and even media organization and why. So there are some costs floating around on buying things, advertising spaces or slots or whatever it happens to be nowadays from different media organizations. So do have a look at those costs because it just gives you an idea. You don't need to include them in your campaign report, but it just gives you an indication of how much things may cost before you go off and do something silly. Okay, on to evaluation. So say hi to objectives again, because evaluation is all about going back through your objectives where you've already established your metrics, because that's what part of your objectives are, is setting your own objectives. So that brand awareness figure I used in my earlier objective, you'd use it here. So in all marketing campaigns, metrics are taken at the start of the campaign or according to your own metric you've set in your objectives. So that brand awareness will increase it from whatever level it is currently by 10%. So if it's 0 for a new brand, then it's up to 10%, or if it's an existing brand, then obviously it's from whatever level it currently is to where you would like to go with 10%. It can be taken before the campaign and also during and at the end of the campaign. And obviously you keep track of these metrics most of the time all the way through the life of a brand. So it's not as though you just do it for the campaign and then stop. you do it ongoing, because marketing research is an integral part of marketing, all the way through a year, and all the way through the life cycle of brands and products. You should also be measuring the other metrics, such as reach and frequency. They're obviously really big with digital and certain types of heritage media like television and radio, to make sure you're getting a good reach into your target markets, and a good frequency, so that way you can achieve recall figures. And of course, things like measuring changes in attitudes towards the ad are all very important ones or metrics to look at for sure. So they're things you need to have a look at in terms of how you're evaluating the ongoing effectiveness of your campaign. And of course, you can throw in new ones too, like social media, on how things might be doing with hashtags or comments like shares, sharing of content on different platforms and across platforms and things like that. All very important when it comes to metrics and measuring the success of your campaign. But ultimately, it's done against objectives you set, and that is the key one you want to look at for measuring the effectiveness of an overall campaign. Different metrics here you can look at for digital and what they call native advertising or heritage advertising here. So can be very contextual to the actual method itself. So make sure you consider that as well when you look at the overall effectiveness of a campaign. Is also measuring the effectiveness of the type of method or platform you've used as well, to make sure that it's been going well. And you can see the different ones used in terms of also working out the formula involved. You don't have to do any of that in this document. It's not necessary because you're not doing a live one. But if you were doing this in practice, they're exactly the metrics you need to understand and get to know as a way of measuring how effective you've been with your campaign. These are some of the social media metrics. I talked about it before, and I can see that social metrics map I think I talked about in previous the previous topic before this one in particular. So again, this is where it comes back to be connected with this one, is looking at this from a metric perspective. You can see exposure, engagement, influence, impact, and advocacy, that PESO model on the far left-hand side, where the social metrics there is connected to the decision-making process. So there is a lot of ways you can metric a campaign. If anything, in the era of big data, that there is definitely a lot of different ways you can metric and evaluate the overall effectiveness of your campaign, and you should be doing that. The more I see, the happier I am as an academic in looking at your campaign overall. But also make them relevant and practical. Again, it's a bit like referencing. Just don't throw them in there and hope for the best. Make sure they're all relevant and specific to your own campaign itself. And if anything, the trap is using too many, because it means then that you've probably chosen one which is not really relevant at all or has no real way of evaluating your campaign. It's more of a look good factor. Okay, that is it for this topic. I hope I've covered everything in good detail for those of you listening and watching and following these topics. If not, please let me know, and talk to you soon on the next topic. Be safe and stay well, and may the coffee gods always be with you.